kind of a pro wrestling vantage point sometimes. And so I'm already a little tempted for hyperbole as it is. But on certain topics, maybe it seems appropriate to kind of pump the brakes just a little bit. And so I've tried to do that for a while. But there's at least enough out there today that we probably got to make sure we address this on the show. So we'll do that here in just a little bit. Ohio Dog, also nice words for the pullover. I will tell you, I don't mind telling you where I got this. UGA bookstore. I am a big, like this is one of those things where I'm very lucky in that the sponsors that we have on this show are sponsors that I truly have relationships with, and I like them as people. I like to use their services. I'm very thankful for that. And y'all hear me talk about the UGA bookstore all the time. I do. I mean, I love the UGA bookstore. They got so much great stuff. All the different apparel makers, Nike included. And so this came from the UGA bookstore. I don't mind telling you that. Absolutely did. Let's see what else is going on. Mark Morris also on the subject of the fact that the chatter around UGA is not going to slow down for a long time. Yeah, given the way the combine went, you have every reason to believe that it's going to run its way all the way through the draft. And, even in the month of May, as he says, that could be very well true. Good to see Tennille checking in there as well. Ooh, this is a good question. Richard D says, if you could have Aaron Murray or David Green as the starting quarterback for the upcoming 2022 season, who would you choose? The numbers would obviously suggest that you would choose Aaron Murray. However, I think my answer to this is probably David Green. And some of this is just kind of my era. Green was the quarterback at a time in which, it's like that early 2000s era for me. I was in my early 20s. It's one of those things where I had just enough money to go to most of the games and just little enough responsibility where, like, Georgia football was the biggest thing in my life back then. It's like, I was, I got married in 2002, so I was kind of moving into what I kind of think of as full-fledged adulthood. But, we were like living in an apartment. We didn't have very many bills. We certainly didn't have kids. Kids were still a long way away from us. And so like that early 2000s era when like all I really had was like a little bit of work and a little bit of, most of my life was just, hey, what's the next fun thing that's going to happen? And obviously a lot of that back then was Georgia football. So I'm always going to have a very special place in my heart. It's probably not a coincidence that you look at like the regular guests we have here, Terrence Edwards, John Stinchcomb, one of these guys kind of from that 2002 team, because that was a very special team for me. David's a guy we've had on the show a lot over the years there as well. So maybe a little bit of a bias on my part because I am very pro 2002, very much a big fan of that team. But I also I'll put up David's big game performances, the big throws he made in big games. I'll put that up with anybody. I really would. And I know that Aaron's got the stats, and I got no disrespect for Aaron Murray, who himself is also a great quarterback. But there is a little bit of a special quotient that I think that David Green did have that I think earns him some love in a conversation like this, even if I'm maybe not the most objective guy on that. Doghouse Lawn Care said the one I'm wearing right now was his favorite hoodie until he just replaced it with a national championship logo instead of the G. That's actually really cool, Doghouse. I'm glad you got that. Very good. Brian Whitehead said that Drew Butler's wife also graduated from Alabama. Ask him what it's like to live in the house with a Bama fan now that the Dogs are on top. Yeah, I've actually heard a good bit of that because there is some Georgia-Alabama house divided. I've always felt like that Georgia-Auburn's probably the greatest of the house divideds for whatever reasons. Maybe it's just the geographic proximity. It seems like you see more of those license plates than anywhere else, but there is no shortage of Georgia fan grad on the one side, Bama fan grad on the other side of the relationship, and I'm imagining there is a little bit of back and forth on some of that kind of stuff. Brian, that's a really good point. West GA Dog fan says, yesterday was my birthday. My wife and daughter gave me a good bit of national championship items. Go Dogs. That's awesome. First of all, I'm glad you got that. I'm glad they got shipped in for you to enjoy them. So that's pretty good on all of that. So happy birthday to you, West GA. That's great to see. Kevin Mills says, I can't help watching the Ringo Pick Six. It's in my Facebook feed at least 10 times a day. Yeah, I know what you mean. I watch it a lot. And like what I do is I try to exercise on a fairly regular basis, and I use the elliptical machine. And, it's one of those things where, so I start off trying to listen to like some podcast or something like that because it just seems like a better use of my time. But the honest truth is that even though I enjoy certainly listening to podcasts, I'm grateful that a lot of you listen to podcasts, sometimes I do have to kind of shift over and do a little bit of music because I need that little extra jolt of energy sometimes, And it's like sometimes if I'm really dragging, like it's one of those things where I kind of have to have like the music kick in. So hopefully my, rate of performance will kind of tick up a little bit, using that as kind of a little bit of a rhythm. Hopefully that'll work for me. And then sometimes, like, even the music's not really working. It's kind of hard to find something that you feel like you haven't heard 10,000 times. And so in those moments when I really need to dig deep to finish a workout, when I really need to, not that I'm, training for, the Olympics or anything, but still just, keeping a basic, exercise routine going, sometimes you got to have a little extra energy for that. And so when I really need that little extra thing, the thing that never fails is to travel over to YouTube. And I will watch, Chris Fowler's call of the Keely Ringo pick six, or, just some of the stuff throughout the years for Georgia football that I'll kind of go back and rewatch. And I think I was actually watching that yesterday, the Fowler call with that, because you love the way it starts. What is it that he says? Hey, biggest throw of Bryce Young's career. Fowler does a pretty good job of setting all that up. Biggest throw of Bryce Young's career, third and whatever, and whatever the down was. I apologize for not remembering. And obviously it's the Ringo interception. And what I love is, and as somebody who's done some play-by-play, and we'll welcome in Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, y'all hang with us for a second. We actually may take a few comments from some of you before we get started today, just because we're in a casual mood. But the point is, as someone who's done some play-by-play, one of the things that I said at the time is that Fowler punctuated that call by basically saying the ball game is over. And I think that Sean McDonough, who was doing the national radio call, who's obviously a veteran play-by-play guy, and it's as big, McDonough's kind of as big as it gets doing some of this kind of stuff. He did the same thing. He's like, and Georgia's going to win the game, or whatever it was that they said. It was basically a signal that the Ringo interception was the end of the game. That was the final moment for UGA. And as it turns out, that's true. And I think most Georgia fans kind of thought that was true there at the time. I remember, though, as someone who's obviously a partisan here, someone who wants Georgia to win, thinking, hey, there's about a minute left. There's, a 15-point lead for Georgia. I had done a high school game earlier that year where there were 2 scores late with a Hail Mary and a onside kick, plus just giving it to the opponent, Alabama. There was a part of me that was thinking, I'm not quite so sure this game is over yet, even though Georgia's up 15 points. I wanted to see that clock get down to those zeros. And had Chris Fowler thought that way, or had Sean McDonough thought that way, the Scott Howard call, I'm actually not as familiar with that. I need to go back and listen to that as to what he said there in that particular moment. But had Fowler been a little more conservative with his call, it's a much weaker call, and it's not nearly as memorable. One of the things that makes the Fowler call in that pretty good, I think the Fowler's actually turned out to be a pretty good play-by-play man. But one of the things that made that call so strong is that Fowler did kind of leap ahead a little bit. He did kind of take the risk of saying 15 points, 55 seconds, that's not going to be enough time for Alabama. This is Georgia's signature moment towards winning a national championship, and his willingness to do that made the call better. Doghouse Lawn Care says nothing better than a workout listening to some of Larry's best calls. I think that's true. I also one of the things I'll also do is that, fans will put up videos of the team running out onto the field, or the Baba O'Reilly thing inside the stadium. I'm not talking about professional stuff. I'm talking about just fan holds up a phone and records that. I'll watch a bunch of that stuff on YouTube too. Sometimes I'll even watch stuff from other stadiums there as well, just because I like college football. I like to see Enter Sandman at Virginia Tech, or some of the stuff like that. When I just am so bored and so wanting to get off this elliptical machine, I'll dig for anything. I'll go back and watch old wrestling promos, or just kind of anything that kind of keeps me kind of fired up on that, for sure. Ken brings up the Falcons possibly drafting a dog. We said yesterday that we'd love to see the Falcons take Trayvon Walker at number 8. In fact, what we said about the Falcons yesterday was this could be a necessity for the team, just given all the bad PR they've had, even dating back to the 28-3 choke job in the Super Bowl. But some of the other stuff since then, obviously the Calvin Ridley thing, the most recent example of this, just a lot of negative headlines surrounding the Falcons. But maybe worse than that is the fact that they are, as someone who lives in the Atlanta area, I can say this pretty comfortably and competently, they're just kind of off the radar all the way around. This is not a franchise right now that's getting very much attention locally. They need something to reboot their image here locally. Drafting a guy like Trayvon Walker in the number 8 spot, to me, would seem to make some sense there with that. However, it's interesting that you start to get the impression, and Connor Riley did briefly mention this yesterday, you get more sense of this, that maybe Trayvon Walker won't be there when the Falcons draft at number 8. Could be a top 5 pick. I've even heard the possibility that maybe the Houston Texans would take Walker at the number 3 spot in this draft. So that gives you an idea of how well he's climbing up draft boards right now, at least based on the current chatter, and this is always changing, and some of this is intentional misinformation. We understand all of that. But as someone who said on the record the Falcons ought to pull the trigger on Walker at number 8, Falcons may not get a chance to draft Walker at number 8. He may be gone before they get there. So I told you, we're going to be a little casual today. So we're on the video platforms. We've got the regular show coming up. I'll tell you more about what's coming up on that in a moment. Let me pop over to some of the other comment sections here for a moment just to say hello and kind of get folks going. We don't normally do this off the top of the show, but it seems like kind of a fun day to do that, especially in light of a schedule for us today that's slightly different than it might sometimes be. Over here on Facebook for a moment, Mike Anderson says the Falcons are a mismanaged franchise. Their roster is a mess. Yeah, I mean, that's the one thing about having a roster as bad as the Falcons have is they could pretty much draft anything, and you couldn't say, well, why are they taking this guy? You know, unfortunately, that's kind of the mess that they're in. But specifically on defense, man, they have not rushed the passer probably for my entire lifetime, but certainly last year they were just so anemic with that a guy like Trayvon Walker just seems like he has, great value for them there in that particular spot. Joseph Kennedy also giving you one of the great play-by-play calls, which is great to see. Greg Childer is also mentioning some of the struggles for UGA athletics. Yeah, it seems like Joni Taylor and the Lady Dogs have struggled here a little bit, and the baseball team is not doing well right now. So you hate to see that. But it's also one of those things where I'm not going to freak out about, the Diamond Dogs too much right now. Did not play a good game last night by all indications. But I'm not going to freak out about that too much right now. You got SEC play looming. This is a team that probably was kind of destined to get better over the course of the season. Sounds like they've had a little bit of a pitching injury they've had to deal with there too. I'm not making excuses. They have not played great. But, the real games of consequence for UGA are kind of on the horizon here. Let's see what else. Steve Highland says the Falcons are the gold standard for mediocrity up there with the Jets. Yeah, it seems like that's kind of true. Do I have this right? Do the Jets and Giants both have 2 top 10 picks? That's kind of an interesting thing for the draft coming up. Both those big New York teams, both drafting twice in the first round. Jacob O'Neill says the inner Sandman for Virginia Tech is fire. It really is. There's some great videos of that online. And as I said before, I'm not a Virginia Tech fan or a fan of any other college team other than Georgia, but I'll still watch some cool stuff from, college games. You just don't get that in anything else. And I'm proud of the atmosphere that Georgia has around its games, but I'm also really proud of the atmosphere that other college football teams have around their game there as well. It's one of the reasons why I end up probably sounding like a blowhard sometimes with my, I think, desire to want to protect college football because it's just really special. And when you start picking at the fabric that holds all this together, who knows when you unravel all of that. And, you tune in to watch these games or you go back and watch some of these old clips and old highlights. Our sport's really great. It's really fun. It's one of the reasons why we spend the entire offseason craving it again. It's one of the reasons why the season seems to go by so fast is because whether it's your team or just other teams around the sport, really, really fun to watch. A couple of YouTube comments, then we'll get ready to get started. Let's see what else. Tennille Calvino says she likes relaxed BA, the king of the hoodies. That's awesome to hear, Tennille. I appreciate that. Great to hear. And it's good to see Tennille popping around a couple of our comment sections here today. Always a welcome addition to any conversation. Scott Harris, and we said this yesterday, we knew a lot of Georgia fans feel this way, that every year we talk about the Falcons taking a UGA player to improve buzz. They never do, and it seems like that's one of those things the Falcons kind of live with right now, fairly or not. That's what a lot of the UGA fans seem to think, and that conversation never really slows down. Scott's right about that. Wally Smith says the call by Fowler on Ringo's interception will always give me jitters. Yeah, Fowler's got a couple of these. It's kind of funny. It's like Fowler's call of the Sony Michel Rose Bowl is great. And honestly, if you haven't gone back and rewatched that game, it's still worth doing that too because of how great that was. And the Fowler call there at the end, he really kind of punctuated the same way. Like I probably pigeonholed him, typecast him a little bit as the host of College Game Day. And when he kind of wanted to make that move into more of the live games, those live broadcasts, being the play-by-play guy, there was a part of me that wondered is Fowler going to really be able to be the guy that does this? It's almost like I still don't think of him in the full-fledged play-by-play role the way that I would like to say an Al Michaels or a Brad Nessler or somebody like that. I probably still don't quite think of Chris Fowler in that role, but I mean, he's really proven himself to be a great voice for the sport. And here's what it always comes down to, and you just kind of can tell this. Guys who like the sport, and you enjoy hearing the play-by-play call from the guys who clearly are fans of the sport. I don't mean fans of a team, I mean fans of the sport. Like we have Brad Nessler on the show a lot. It's obvious that Brad cares about college football. He's doing the games on Saturday, but he's following the sport throughout the week. It's obvious that he's doing that. We have Tom Hart on the show a lot. Tom's very much the same way. And Tom's like this with, not just football, but with basketball and baseball and everything else, that you can tell that he very much cares about the SEC, that he's following this as a fan. Once again, not necessarily a fan of a team, although I guess he did graduate from an SEC school, but it's not about being a fan of a team, it's about being a fan of the league, being a fan of the sport, being attracted to the entertainment value of it all. And the game just sounds better when it's in the hands of somebody like that, and I think a lot of you would probably agree with that. All right, so let me give you an idea of what we're doing today. So we're getting ready to get going. I told you we're kind of in a relaxed, casual mood. It's raining outside. It's freezing cold. The little taste of spring we got last week was a total false start, and we're kind of back to the winter doldrums here, but we're going to keep it fun on the show today. Normally it's Mike Griffith on Wednesdays. Mike's on some kind of vacation. I never exactly know where Mike is, but I know he's not here right now. He's on vacation. We had him on the show on Monday, so go late in the broadcast from Monday, and you can hear that with Mike. So today we have a special guest showing up for the first time in kind of a while, and it could not be any timelier than it is. Later on today, we're going to have Drew Butler on the show. Drew, obviously former Dog, great former punter in the NFL, but is also now Executive Vice President at Icon Sports Marketing, very involved in the NIL world, helping to cultivate deals for UGA guys and potentially guys all across the football landscape. But this is a guy, as we are in this ever-changing world of name, image, likeness, revenue payments coming the way of athletes, Drew's a guy who understands that from the inside. So there are a lot of questions. Drew had a very interesting column recently where he talked about the way in which NIL is set to evolve in the future. And so we'll kind of cover a lot of that with Drew Butler here coming up before the show is done today. I think that's going to be really timely. Also, there is a topic that I have been a little hesitant to want to get into because there's a part of me that wants to be careful not to hype it up too much until it actually comes to pass. But enough is out there right now that it seems weird if we don't speak about it. So we'll do some of that here before we're done. But off the top of the show, the great combine performance at UGA seems to already be paying dividends. We know it's going to eventually impact UGA recruiting for the positive, but it's already seemingly doing something kind of nice for the program ahead of the start of spring practice and the start of the 2022 season. So what do you say we talk about that right now as DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Breda Pest Management, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Breda Pest Management, the official pest control of UGA Athletics.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
As you might imagine, the great performance from the UGA guys at the NFL Combine this past week still getting a lot of attention, and it's getting a lot of attention, I would say, from some of the most important people who could notice. Now, eventually we know that when Georgia got the kind of commercial that it got on the NFL Network this past weekend, it's just intuitive that's going to eventually benefit UGA recruiting. We have no reason to believe that won't be true. However, what I want to point out today is the possibility that the impact of the Combine can benefit Georgia in other ways beyond just future recruits taking notice and choosing UGA because of that. There's actually more benefits other than just that. In fact, Georgia may be experiencing some of those right now. Let me start with this. So as fun as it was to watch the former Georgia players going through drills and how many of those guys had shockingly good 40-yard dash times, including Jordan Davis, obviously tipping the Toledos at 341 pounds and yet running a blazing fast 40-yard dash, almost for any human, but certainly for someone as big as he is. As fun as all that is to see, part of the thing that I enjoy as much as anything else is a chance to hear these guys also speak there as well. And if you go to the DawgNation YouTube page, you can see all of this for yourself and take a moment to listen to all this for yourself. And no doubt in the weeks and days to come on our show, we'll continue to unpack a lot of what those guys said during their press conference. But to see a guy like, for instance, Jordan Davis sitting there at the podium, it's a confluence of topics. You have NFL-themed media asking Davis about moving on to the NFL. You have team-specific NFL media who are kind of talking about the possibility that Davis might land at their organization or whatever Georgia player might be talking to this point in time. But you also have a heavy dose of college football media, including our team from DawgNation on hand there as well, specifically Mike Griffith. And it's a great chance in kind of a relaxed atmosphere, at least relaxed in terms of you're not, in the daily grind of a college football season, a little bit more relaxed atmosphere to get some thoughts on how that player viewed his time at Georgia and what he thinks of Georgia now that he's gone. And really, if you want to zero in on the part that's always the most interesting to me, and eventually we'll probably do a lot of this on our show, we're starting to do some of it now, but the thing that's always the most interesting to me about former Georgia player in a pre-draft press conference is that moment when he does get to talk about what he thinks of the school that he's now a fan of. Like, there's a way in which Jordan Davis becomes like you and me. He's gone from being the guy that wears the Georgia uniform to now he's the guy that wears the Georgia sweatshirt or the Georgia t-shirt, if you can find one that's big enough to fit him, that he's cheering on this team much the same way all of us are. And the question comes up of, what do you think about what's left at Georgia and who gets a chance to emerge for Georgia now that you're no longer there? Now, I'm going to set this clip up by saying this, is that as luck would have it, it's maybe the most interesting thing that Davis said, but it's also the moment, and I do this from time to time because I'm kind of, bouncing around all over the place. I have a hard time sitting still. Every now and then you'll hear me, knock my microphone or bump into the desk or something like that. And I guess Davis does the same thing here, and he's bigger than I am, so when he bumps a microphone, that microphone very much feels it. So this happens right before Davis gives his answer, or right as Davis gives his answer. So the audio quality on this is not exactly perfect necessarily. It's also one of those things where you have a lot of these press conferences going on concurrently, so there's always going to be a little bleed over with the mic of loud players speaking 10 feet over, who we hear a little bit of his audio there as well. But what you're about to hear for a moment is, and this sets us up for a conversation, what you're about to hear in a moment is Mike Griffith asked Jordan Davis, now that a lot of great defensive linemen are leaving UGA, what do you think about what is left? And listen carefully to see if you can hear it. Admittedly, this is not great audio quality, but that's just the way it was recorded there in Indianapolis last week. But still worth hearing the words of Jordan Davis, this from last week.
Jordan, who are some of the guys that are going to emerge at Georgia now that you, Devontae, Trayvon moving on?
Jalen Carter, Zion Lowe, those guys, and a few freshmen that's going to, step up and do their thing. And I'm just ready to see them play. They know what to do. They're well coached, and to see them next year, it'll be a great experience.
So you can hear at the end how the techie from the NFL kind of got the microphone fixed back again at the very end. It comes in perfectly after kind of being a little distant there for a second. But you basically heard Jordan Davis give you three answers to Mike's question of, hey, now that you and Devontae Wyatt and Trayvon Walker are gone, what's left at UGA? Who steps up now that you're not there? I find three things to be interesting. First of all, Jordan Davis didn't take 2 seconds, didn't take even a half a second to say, it's Jalen Carter. Jalen Carter is the best player on Georgia's team for 2022. If there was a media guide, we don't really do that anymore, but if there was a media guide, Carter would be on the cover of it. If there were the old school paper tickets. Remember, one of the things I used to love in the summer, my grandfather was a Georgia season ticket holder, and it was that moment, I guess it would have been early August, where the tickets came in the mail. And for those of you who remember this, it was always a big piece of cardboard, and you tore off the individual tickets for that particular game. But when the season ticket came in, it's a big piece of cardboard, kind of an uncut sheet that had all those tickets. And I was always very curious as a kid to see what picture was on each of those tickets. Well, if you were doing that in 2022, Jalen Carter would be very prominently on one of those tickets. It's just one of the ways in which you touted, a great player at a place like Georgia. We don't really do that, but if we did, Jalen Carter would be in so many ways the face of this program for the upcoming season. The lack of hesitation in Jordan Davis' answer is an indication of that. The other name that Davis brings up there, and I think this is a very important name, one of the most important for the upcoming spring practice, that's Zion Logue. I'm not a scout. I don't pretend to be. But I feel like I've seen some pretty good things from Zion Logue. I feel like it's hard to be what Jordan Davis was, but in terms of that big physical presence in the middle of a defensive line that not only stops the run, but convinces teams to not even try to run. That's a very important part of what Jordan Davis did. Not only did Davis make stops on run plays, he made stops in the coaching room. He made stops in the game plan. He made stops of, well, should we even try to run if Jordan Davis is standing there? And very frequently the answer when playing Georgia was, no, let's not even try this running play because it's destined not to work anyway. You've literally beaten them before the game even begins. Zion Logue is not going to be asked to do some of that for Georgia. Hearing Davis mention his name only adds to the intrigue of what Logue could be stepping into and what this spring could look like for him. The third thing that Davis says there is also pretty interesting too, which is he believes there are a lot of incoming freshmen who are going to have their chance there as well. And there's always going to be a natural fascination with young players in sports. Like I grew up collecting baseball cards and things like that. Hot rookie is always a hot topic, right? It's always fun, whether it be NBA, NFL, Major League Baseball. Who's the hot rookie? That's always a fun thing to think about. Well, in college football, who are the names to know of incoming freshmen? That's always kind of a fun thing there too. So we're always going to have a natural tendency just to be curious about the possibility of, hey, who are some of those incoming freshmen who may be able to do some things for Georgia here this year? And we'll get to them. Obviously, we'll talk about that in a moment. But before that, I want you to hear a little bit more from Jordan Davis, because the other thing that Davis talked about is if we do expect some young players, incoming freshmen, to have big seasons for Georgia, or a guy who's been here like Zion Logue to thrive in an expanded role, well, how does that happen? What is the way in which, not to even say you're going to be as good as Jordan Davis, but how do you play in such a way that it reminds you of Jordan Davis or reminds you of Devontae White or reminds you of Trayvon Walker? How do you fill those shoes? Well, in that same press conference, Jordan Davis talked about kind of what that's all about. And it's interesting to hear Davis speak about things other than the physical. There's obviously some physical requirements when it comes to playing defensive line at the SEC level, a place like Georgia. But some of what Davis talks about, even though the Combine put all that physicality on display, some of what Davis talked about goes beyond that and becomes about your approach to the game and the thing that motivates you as a player. Once again, more good stuff from Jordan Davis. Take a listen to this.
It's about the love. We always talk about love for our team, and in order for a team to be well-rounded and well-connected, they have to have that love. So I'm sure those boys, they know what it takes to win, especially the older guys. So they should be in good shape next year.
Interesting to hear Jordan Davis say that, hey, if you want to be great at football the way I've turned out to be, you better love the sport. And not only love the sport, you better love your team. You better love the opportunity that you've been given. And in some form or fashion, even if we've never played the sport quite at that level, in some form or fashion, we do kind of understand that's true. However, here's the thing that I think we also probably somewhat intuitively understand. If we don't understand it, we should. That conjuring up that love is not always an easy thing to do. It's just not. That you want to love, you should love football and you kind of want to, but sometimes we've heard it said you kind of love the idea of football more than you actually love the grind. There has to be a moment for many of these players, they do question their commitment of, why am I working so hard? How is all of this going to pay off for me? Is it worth it? Am I doing something that 20 years from now I'm going to be glad that I did? And a lot of us who've tried to challenge ourselves with certain things in life, we do know what that feels like to be in the middle of something. Everything feels like a failure in the middle. Being in the middle of something and wondering, gosh, I'm working so hard. What's all of this for? And to me, that's one of the things that I think makes the NFL scouting combine, the performance that the Georgia players had last week, the attention they got for that. That's one of the things about that I think is so valuable. We all know that eventually it's going to pay off for Georgia in terms of recruiting, because who wouldn't want to be the next Jordan Davis, Devontae White, Trayvon Walker at a place like Georgia? But I think it also shows value for UGA right now because of the time we're in the calendar. This is kind of pre-spring practice, although spring practice is right around the corner. This is the time in which players are asked to improve their bodies. They're asked to eat right. They're asked to work out harder than they've ever worked out before. They're asked to go through a grinded spring practice that, for the most part, happens away from the watchful eye of fan and media. You don't get those pats in the back. You don't get those loves, those accolades. You get pushed, and you get pushed back on, and you have a bunch of players in your position group, a bunch of players on the field who are all as good as you, and it's very hard to stand out. You have been at high school where you've been standing out amongst your peers for your entire life. All of a sudden now, everybody was that guy for his own high school, and that's a little bit anxiety-producing. You have to imagine it probably is. But when you see Jordan Davis have what happened to him and what's about to happen to him when he gets paid, or Devontae Wyatt, or Trayvon Walker, or a bunch of other guys at similar positions who are in kind of similar spots for UGA right now, all of a sudden I think it makes it a little easier to buy into the task of improving yourself at football in this current part of the year, when it's about getting your body right and it's about getting your mind right to go through the grind of spring practice, or getting ready for the fall as well, when all of that starts happening all over again. And the cool thing is, a couple of very important people seem to be taking notice of all of this, or at least the general vibe that seems to exist around this. I want to show you a little bit of an exchange between a couple of UGA signees that give you an idea of the fact that maybe all the buzz that exists right now around the Georgia defensive lineman at the NFL Scouting Combine, maybe it's already paying off. Let me show you this on the screen here for a moment. Christian Miller, Georgia signee, says back on March 6th on Twitter, "In Trey Scott, we trust." Now, first of all, every Georgia fan agrees with that now. I'd love to kind of go back and find what some folks may have been saying about Scott years ago, because we have a tendency to want to jump the gun on things. But as of right now, there is no Georgia fan who wouldn't fully co-sign on Christian Miller's statement that "in Trey Scott we trust." And obviously Big Bear Alexander retweets that and kind of gives you the amen, basically also endorsing the notion that both Christian Miller, Big Bear Alexander, so many of these other Georgia defensive linemen are very excited about playing for Trey Scott at Georgia. Now, I take that to mean something, and this is what I take it to mean. That all of a sudden when Trey Scott pushes them, whether it be in some cases young freshmen during spring practice, in other cases maybe later on in the summer, or any position group pushing any group of elite UGA recruits, when those guys are pushed to be better this winter, as they've been improving their bodies, this spring, as they try to learn what it means to play in the Georgia program, heading towards the summer and into the fall, as they actually try to earn some playing time with this program, when they are pushed to be the best version of themselves, all of a sudden those players have a very tangible reason why they ought to respond well to that kind of coaching. They ought to respond well to that kind of challenge, because clearly Jordan Davis got better because of it. Clearly Devontae Wyatt got better because of it. Frankly, Trayvon Walker was already a stud when he came here, but the truth is he has also turned out to be exactly what he was supposed to be. And if you don't think that Christian Miller notices that, and Big Bear Alexander notices that, Mikael Williams notices that, other guys notice that, of course they do. This is why those power programs in college football kind of always seem to stay the same. Because once you get the cycle moving in the right direction, it does have a tendency to want to replicate itself. And now these guys, Christian Miller, Big Bear Alexander, you just heard from, they have a proof of concept. They can see themselves as a Devontae Wyatt, or as a Trayvon Walker, or as a Jordan Davis, or as a Jalen Carter, who Jordan told you a moment ago is the next one of those guys. They can see the steps in which they're trying to follow. And when you see the financial rewards that are about to come the way of the guys who've been through all of this, all the more motivation to go through it just as intensely, just as aggressively as the previous Georgia guys did. This is how football is supposed to work, and right now at UGA, it's working out exactly as it should. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Presented by Breda Pest Management here today, live on video starting at 9:45, 1st and 15, DawgNation.com, DawgNation app. 10 a.m. after that, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, of course, Radio Noon, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, podcasts, wherever you find them, all the various podcast platforms, the Apple Player, Spotify. Of course, we post the show each and every day at the world-famous DawgNation.com. A lot of ways for you to connect with us. We are glad that you do all of that. Very thankful for you, and very thankful for our friends at Breda Pest Management. Not because they're good friends of ours here at Dog Nation, have been for a long time, although we've only been telling you about them on the show here for a couple of weeks, but also thankful for the great work in which they do. They're big supporters of UGA there as well. In fact, they are the official pest management company for UGA Athletics. That means they're taking care of Sanford Stadium, they're taking care of Foley Field, the Equestrian Complex, so many cool venues. Breda Pest Management helps cover there for UGA. And if they're doing that kind of work for the dogs, imagine the kind of work they can do for you there as well. Because let's face it, think about Sanford Stadium here for a moment. On a surface that size, that's about enough space for about 1 million termites. Now, one termite can do a bunch of damage, but think about 1 million termites. And if that's how much room you'd have for 1 million there at Sanford Stadium, think about your own home there as well. And that's where Breda Pest Management wants to step in, but not just bugs. They do critters as well. All of those things. You may have one company that does one company that does the other. Breda Pest Management can do all that for you. Truly, you're one source for all of that you need. They've been around since 1975. They've been taking good care of folks for a long time. That's why Dog Nation trusts them. That's why I trust them. That's why you should there as well. It's Breda Pest Management. Now, for those of you listening radio podcast, let me explain this. That Breda is B-R-E-D-A. That's Breda. Breda Pest Management. So if you go to their website, bredapest.com, you can learn a lot more, including what they can do for you. In Georgia, termites are just a thing. Like, if you haven't had them eventually, if you haven't had them already, you will have them eventually. That's just what it means to live in Georgia. So you got to keep your house protected. Bredapest.com, the way to do that. B-R-E-D-A. That'll get you in touch. Bredapest.com for a lot more on that. All right, today's a little bit of a different type of show for us in that normally it's Mike Griffith here on a Wednesday for us, but Mike's on vacation, so we'll catch him again next week. We also had him on Monday's show back from Indianapolis. He was there on the scene for the NFL Scouting Combine, as you heard a moment ago. So we'll speak to Mike again next Wednesday. Today, though, good special guest in his place. A little bit different time slot, but good special guest in his place. We're going to talk to Drew Butler in a moment. Now, Drew's a great former dog, follows the program obviously pretty closely, played in the NFL. But in addition to that, Drew is also an executive with Icon Sports Marketing, which is a company heavily involved in the NIL world. And there are obviously a lot of big changes that have taken place when it comes to NIL. There are more that are seemingly on the horizon. Drew actually wrote an interesting column about that recently. He's just heavily involved in all of this. Now that UGA's got its own name, image, likeness collective that's risen up here, it just seems like an appropriate time to catch up with Drew. We haven't had Drew on the show in really kind of a while. In fact, the last time we would have talked to Drew, it would have been way before NIL stuff. So he's deeply involved in this world. He's got a lot of interesting things to say about that. We'll do that with him coming up in just a little bit. Before that, though, I do want to go around the doghouse here, and I want to talk about a subject we really haven't talked about before, or at least haven't talked about in a while. And it's one of those things where I am given to hyperbole by nature. In other words, my temptation is always to want to hype things. And when you kind of already start off wanting to hype things, there's always a tendency to want to hype things more than they possibly should be, especially when it comes to Georgia football, a subject that I care deeply about and that you do there as well. So there are times when I put some intentional governors on myself to prevent that from happening. There's some times when I'm like, hey, BA, maybe be careful and maybe don't overhype this, because sometimes it just makes a little bit more sense to be cautious more so than not. Example of that in the person of Arik Gilbert right now, who I can't help but notice that things with Gilbert seem to be trending in a pretty positive direction for UGA. Now, a lot of you know this. You've been following the show for a long time. Gilbert is one of the recruits that probably fascinated me when he came out of high school, married out of high school, as much as anybody ever has. I think that I just thought he was one of the truly unique specimens that I had seen in terms of a guy that big who was that polished as a pass catcher. I just thought he was really a very amazing prospect. Really wanted to come to Georgia. He went to LSU. When Gilbert transferred to UGA, I was thrilled about that because that's how good of a prospect I thought he was. But he's also now been away from football for a little while, seemingly working to get back where he's, from a health standpoint, able to play again. We've been rooting for him as he does that, for him personally, not just because it benefits us who care about UGA. We just think that the guys who have a chance to play football makes their life better. We want them to have a chance to play football. And so from that standpoint, we're rooting for Arik Gilbert and all of that. And the best you can tell, things seem to be going pretty well. Starts off in January. Remember when we saw Gilbert at the national championship celebration? There was a photo of him that kind of got passed around the internet, all smiles, looking really good. That was kind of step one in all of this. Step two came last week. Maybe we should have talked about this at the time. As I said before, sometimes you try to kind of pump the brakes on some of this kind of stuff. So we didn't mention it, but seems worth mentioning now that Gilbert was also honored by Georgia again last week for the second time as Academic Player of the Week. I'll show you this tweet from Kirby Smart, at least for those of you watching on video. Smart saying, "Congratulations to our Academic Players of the Week." Gunnar Stockton apparently already settling in at UGA. He's one of those guys. Chris Smith doing some good things in the classroom. Great to see. But the other face here, and you can't help but notice this, it is Arik Gilbert. Gilbert got this honor not too long ago from Georgia there as well. So for the second time, he's Academic Player of the Week, which means that Gilbert's already a better student than I ever was. If he's been honored as an academic guy twice, I can promise you that's more academic accolades than I ever got in the entirety of my college career. So Gilbert's already a better student than I was. But the point is, that was one of those things of, oh, well, if Kirby Smart in a roundabout way is tweeting about Arik Gilbert, that's going to get some attention, along with the photo that folks saw of him at the title celebration and everything else. Now, there's another thing that's kind of out there where video of he and Denalyn Morissette and some others kind of doing some training stuff together. I think we have this we can show. FSF Recruits is one of these Twitter handles that a lot of times has a little bit of video like this. You'll see Gilbert, for those of you watching on video, on your screen here in just a moment, kind of doing some running. And I don't know, man, it looks to be in pretty good shape, the best that I can tell. And so you got, video of Gilbert training. You got Kirby Smart tweeting about the academic stuff. We've seen Gilbert in some UGA gear as recently as January. And it's one of those things of, well, come on, BA. All of this adds to something, doesn't it? And there's a part of me that says, yeah, it seems like things are going pretty well right now. I still, for some reason, I don't know why, maybe some of you will reach out and say there's no need to do this. Maybe, this is not needed. But for some reason, there's a part of me that wants to temper my enthusiasm about all of this. And I think that my temptation to want to do that is out of respect for the journey that Gilbert's on. It's not easy to go through whatever it is that has taken him off the football field. It's not an easy thing to go through. And so out of respect for what he himself has admitted that he is kind of enduring right now, I want to be respectful of his journey, I guess. And I'm not trying to be like a blowhard. I'm trying to be sincere. That I want to be respectful of his journey, and I don't want to rush him in all of this. And I want to allow this to run its course however it needs to, whatever time that it needs to take. But hard not to deny that things seem to be going pretty well for Arik Gilbert right now, or at least that's the impression that we get. And just in case you need a reminder of why this is a big deal for UGA, because let's face it, time passes quickly, news cycle spins fast, people have a tendency to not to have very long memories. It's been so long since we've seen an Arik Gilbert on the field. The time at Marietta High School seems like a very long time ago. His freshman season at LSU also seems like kind of a while ago now there as well. You can almost forget what Gilbert has the chance to be as a player when he is fully healthy, both mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, everything else. But let's let the words of Todd Monken from back in August provide a reminder of why Gilbert, if he is back with Georgia again, one that would be a very big deal, because at the time, Monken made quite a comparison that seems, woo boy, relevant now based on how well it's turned out for this guy. This is Todd Monken from August.
I think he's adapted well. He's a special talent because he's in the Brock Bowers mode, and that he's athletic enough to play receiver, but big enough to do some things on the interior. He's a size matchup. He's a run after catch guy. He loves to play the game. So, we're excited that he's part of our program. So would you like to have another player at UGA in, as Todd Monken said, in the Brock Bowers mold? Would you like to have that if you're UGA? My guess is you probably would. And Monken's not the kind of guy that just goes around throwing compliments, around very easily. This is a pretty salty dude from time to time. And when Monken said that, I don't think we fully realized just how good Brock Bowers was going to be. But in retrospect, now that we do know how good that he is, to hear Monken back in August say that we think that Arik Gilbert's kind of in that Bowers mold, how'd you like to have two Brock Bowers? And see, this is me kind of getting to the hype thing, which I'm trying not to do. So, yeah, selfishly, I do hope that all of this for Gilbert adds up to what it seems like it could. And I'd love to see some of that during spring practice. I am going to hold off on saying, and that's definitely what's going to occur, because I don't know. And right now, I think a lot of us don't know. But to see some positive indications, to see some evidence of some potential good news, I think we'll take that as kind of a nice thing. So
That's the story on all of that. And here we are on DawgNation Daily. Now, we're going to get Drew Butler coming up about 5 minutes from right now. We'll talk to Drew about a couple of interesting things related to the world of name, image, likeness. Before that, though, let's do this. Let's go around the world of the rest of the SEC basketball tournament getting going. A couple of other interesting things there as well. Let's do that as we go cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
All right, so we'll get Drew Butler here coming up in just a little bit. Before that, though, cruise around the SEC courtesy of our friends at Royal Caribbean, and there's still a little bit of time left. Now, there's not much time, but there's a little bit of time left that you can still book your travel to be on the DawgNation cruise with us. DawgNation.com, link at the top of the page. Get in there and see it. Leaving late April from Port Canaveral on Independence of the Seas, going to Nassau in the Bahamas, going to Perfect Day Coco Cay, having a great time. Myself, Mike Griffith, Jeff Santel, a lot of the DawgNation folks, and you, if you can join us. Got to do it quickly, though. DawgNation.com, place to go to get there and to be a part of all of that. So cruise around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Let me hit a couple of stories. So Missouri's going through spring practice right now, and one of the topics that's being discussed around the program is not for the Tigers on the field. It's some of the action around the program and the possibility that Missouri might still be interested in a transfer quarterback. One of the reasons why this comes up is because it was heavily rumored that Missouri was one of the teams that was in pursuit of Jaden Daniels, the former Arizona State quarterback, when Daniels put his name in the transfer portal recently. Ultimately, as you're aware, Daniels decided to go to LSU. So, after having lost out on Jaden Daniels, the question came up around Eli Drinkwitz this week of, are you interested in a transfer quarterback? And Drinkwitz played it kind of coy, saying that we're not definitely taking one, but we're also definitely not taking one, basically making it sound like if the right guy were available, they might be interested in making that decision. Missouri's pretty young at quarterback right now. Now, for what it's worth, I think the incoming freshman, Sam Horn, when he gets there, I think he's going to be a nice prospect. And I don't, listen, Sam's got a lot of choices in life about, he's a baseball player and everything else, but the former Collins Hill quarterback, if they want to build something around Horn, I think they have a chance to do that. It was a very big recruiting win when Missouri got that over Tennessee, but I think that Horn potentially has a very bright future. But as far as what they have right now, what they have going through spring practice, it certainly seems like they're open to the possibility of something else. And the reason why I bring this up is because Missouri's also been one of those schools that have been somewhat rumored for JT Daniels. I don't have anything new for you on Daniels. We did ask Mike Griffith about that when he was here on Monday. I did mention that, I think the quick way with which Jaden Daniels left Arizona State, went to LSU, I think does kind of put a little bit of an interesting level of intrigue about what is next for JT Daniels. But as of now, we don't really know. But it is interesting to hear one of the schools that Daniels was rumored to have been in contact with openly say that, yeah, if the right transfer quarterback were to be available, we'd be interested in all of that. But no word exactly on who that right quarterback is just yet. On the hardwood, the SEC begins its basketball tournament. Georgia is set to get going on this, taking place down there in Tampa. And Tom Crean facing questions. Our buddy Chip Towers from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution got a good story up on this there as well about the future for him there at Georgia. Crean basically saying that all questions about that are going to have to be directed to the Georgia Athletic Department. Honestly, I think that Crean's actually been a pretty good soldier throughout all of this. I don't have a negative word to say about Crean at all. I mean, clearly the results on the field or on the court are not what they're supposed to be. But, Crean's also kind of played up the string here in kind of an admirable way. Seems like UGA, who never had much of a financial incentive to fire him during the season, they've kind of let this play out. I know there was like the one weird thing that happened at the one game, but honestly, I don't even know that I really care all that much about that. As far as like who are potential replacements, Chip also wrote about that, some of the AJC. The big name here is Jonas Hayes. Obviously, Steve Forbes has now signed a contract extension, at least reportedly signed one at Wake Forest. That would seem to take his name out of the running on this. Andy Enfield at USC is a name that I'm kind of intrigued by here. Simply because back when I was a very big college basketball fan, when he was at Florida, Florida Gulf Coast, when they were Dunk City and Enfield was the coach there, that's one of my favorite like Cinderella teams of all time. And Enfield was the coach of that team. He's at USC now. So not only was this a kind of a former darling of the Cinderella round, but also he's at USC having a pretty good season. There's some some interest there on that. Jonas Hayes really is a pretty good recruiter, even if he's, not the experienced head coach. The lack of head coaching experience makes me a little nervous there, but he's obviously a guy that's going to get some talk. And Dennis Gates from Cleveland State. Gates was at one point in time, I believe, on Leonard Hamilton's staff at Florida State. So that's another guy that's got experience recruiting the state of Georgia and the Atlanta area. So those are some of the names being talked about as the next Georgia basketball coach from our buddy Chip Towers, Atlanta Journal-Constitution, as the SEC tournament gets going here. And then I'll also mention this very quickly. So Baker Mayfield is set to get a statue there at Oklahoma. And this is one of those things that brings up a couple things for me on this, and maybe we'll do more of this later on. But when you see the proliferation of statues around so much of college football, multiple schools having multiple statues, the lack of statues at UGA at some point in time just gets a little weird, doesn't it? And I'm not just talking about Herschel Walker, although Herschel Walker would be the most prominent. I'm talking about a lot of guys. Charlie Trippey, he's 100 years old, and he's, still, my understanding, in pretty good health. How great would it be for him to see himself get a statue at UGA while he's still around here? I don't know. This is one of those things I think we need to examine in greater detail at some point in time. There just seems to be a lack of statues at UGA that some of the other programs around the world of college football seem to have. But that's a different topic for a different day. Let me instead now turn our attention to something that's obviously dominated so much of the college football landscape for quite some time, and there are more changes seemingly on the horizon. Our next guest, Drew Butler, has actually written about some of that recently. He's also kind of followed that now from within the corridors of all this with his role there at Icon Sports. He joins us here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. It's great to speak to Drew for the first time in a while. Drew, thanks for being back on the show. We certainly appreciate your time. I'm not hearing Drew. I don't know if I should be.
Can you hear me?
I can. Yeah, I can hear you now, Drew. Sorry about that. Thanks so much. We appreciate you being here. Hope you're doing well.
Yeah, B.A., thanks for having me on, man. Great chatting with you.
Yeah, it's great to chat with you there, too. So I think you had an interesting column that you wrote the other day about the way in which name, image, likeness is going to change, and I want to speak to you about a lot of that. But before we do that, let me just get a quick thought from you on this. Obviously, the last time you and I would have spoke on a show like this, Georgia was trying to kick in the door and win that national championship. Now they have. You obviously remain, pretty close around the program as a alumnus and a former Letterman there. How fun was it for you to see Georgia get that national championship back in January and kind of get that monkey off the back of the program?
Man, it was awesome. I was up in Indianapolis, got to go to the game, and what a game it was. I've never seen so many just genuinely happy people together embracing one another. And after Keeley took that interception back for a touchdown, and especially the contrast from how everybody felt after the SEC championship game, where essentially all hope was lost. You kind of had to shake it off a few weeks later, looking towards that Michigan matchup. I felt really good heading into the Orange Bowl about how Georgia matched up against the Wolverines. And then optimism, that classic optimism that all Georgia fans have leading up to that national championship game. The way that team fought, persevered through really 3.5 quarters of mediocre football, to then put the hammer down, finally get that monkey off their back and be national champions. I'm just so proud of them, so proud of our university, the coaching staff, the support staff, everybody involved. It was a real special ride, and I'm looking forward to seeing a lot more success in the future.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And obviously, when you think about the future of college football, you think about name, image, likeness, revenue, payments for the players being a big part of that in some form or fashion. Before we kind of get into some of what has happened, what's going to happen, remind folks in your role there at Icon Sports, like how you are involved in the name, image, likeness world right now, and then we'll get into more detail about what's currently going on.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm an executive vice president at Icon Source. And since 2018, Icon Source has been a digital marketplace that connects brands with athletes for endorsement deals. So with over 3,000 pro athletes and working with 500 plus sports agents for 3-4 years now, Icon Source has functionality to allow brands, any brands, mom and pop shops to regional, national, global brands to engage with athletes and their agents to facilitate actual endorsement deals. Think of social media activations, in-person appearances, speaking engagements, commercial shoots, autograph signings. All of those things can be done on our platform through software with contracts, payment processing, and that seemingly allowed Icon Source to have a great way to strategize their entrance into the college opportunity with name, image, and likeness. I joined Icon Source in 2020, helped them pivot and set up what their functionality would be for student athletes. And now, it's 9 months into NIL. We have thousands of student athletes and thousands of brands on our platform that can engage with one another, with complete transparency for compliance, and we protect them with contract templates. We make sure that they get paid. We just want student athletes to see any and every opportunity available to them, and it's been a lot of fun for these first 9 months.
So a word that we've heard used a lot lately is the idea of a collective. And there was a story at The Athletic recently about Tennessee and the collective that's been established to support their athletes. You hear, in some cases, rumors about this kind of stuff. In other cases, more tangible things. I believe the University of Texas already has a fairly large, well-established collective in place, and now Georgia's got one too. What does that specifically mean from your perspective, the fact there is now an NIL collective that's been built and established and is set up to support UGA athletes?
Yeah, collectives are the buzzword right now across the name, image, and likeness industry, and they're all well-intentioned, right? The NCAA has been very inactive in this new era. I think a lot of people did not expect that, and I think that's really hurting the student athletes. But what it is doing is it's allowing the free market to come up with ideas to support their university. So these collectives started popping up, and there are groups of influential alumni and donors who want to pool together money to then spread around to the student athlete base to entice them to come, obviously make it more attractive when they're on the recruiting trail. And Georgia just announced theirs a week and a half ago called the Classic City Collective. I think Georgia specifically across the national landscape of collectives is unique. It's unique in a couple of different ways. One, the CEO is Matt Hibbs. Matt worked in the compliance department at Georgia with the football team for years. So he has a very keen understanding of the rules of how student athletes are experiencing this new era. And then the director of operations is John Staten, who just won a national championship as a student athlete on the Georgia football team. So he knows in the locker room perspective how this affects the daily grind of being a student athlete. The Classic City Collective, I see it as 3 arms. There's a charitable aspect with the DGV Fund, which is what the 5 Georgia football players started a year ago to create positive change with causes that they care about. There is obviously the collective, where if there is any entity or donor that wanted to support the collective and write them a check to donate to the collective, they can do that. And then Icon Source has provided the Classic City Collective with their own branded marketplace to where any brand, business, product, restaurant can click in and have access to the Georgia student athletes who are a part of the collective to then send them actual NIL endorsement deals, right? Social media activations, those autograph signings, those appearances, commercials, what I described to earlier. So the Classic City Collective is going about it the right way, saying we have many different ways you can activate student athletes. The other collectives that you mentioned, Texas A&M, Texas, Oregon, whatever, they come out with these amazing articles talking about 25 to 30 million. I have my hesitancy about being able to corroborate some of those claims, but Sure. It is certainly an exciting time, that's for sure. And I know Georgia's going about it the right way.
Yeah, so I think that's really interesting, and I kind of think it leads us into a couple other topics there as well. And you wrote an interesting column recently about this, about how you think NIL is going to change in the future. We've already kind of gotten used to the change, the fact that it's a present factor in our conversation, and maybe more evolution in the future. And this is one of the things you kind of touched on, and I'm curious if I have the right read on this. I sort of gather that some of the states that rush to get a name, image, likeness law on the books almost kind of regret doing so as quickly as they did, now that the NCAA, for the most part, is just not really a participant in the oversight on all of this. And the sense that I get, I'm thinking about the state of Florida in particular here, is one of the examples that comes to mind. Almost seems like that by putting an NIL law on the books, they've actually restricted what some of their schools in their state can do. For instance, the whole idea of pay for play. Right now, most state laws seem to restrict the notion that you can just pay a guy to come to your school or pay him just for playing on the team. That most state laws seem to favor the idea of the payment being for some sort of like marketability factor or whatever. And I get the impression that some legislators regret writing the law that way. What do you think about that? And are we looking at an NIL future where, hey, you can just pay a player because you want to, or pay a player because he went to your school, and you can do this to induce a recruit, certainly something that right now, by the letter of the law, is not allowed?
Yeah. It's all very interesting. So I think the first thing is the states that put the NIL bills in focus before July 1st of last year did it to protect their student athletes, because the NCAA did not have a blanket approach until the 11th hour. So Governor Kemp signed a bill in Georgia to essentially say, hey, our students can capitalize on their name, image, and likeness. And if the NCAA wants to do something about it and maybe jeopardize their eligibility, you're going to have to take the state to court. Florida did the exact same thing. They said, we want our student athletes to be able to monetize their NIL regardless of what the NCAA says. So they did it prior to July 1 as a protective measure to allow these kids to do so. The NCAA has completely fumbled the ball. Now they're being extremely reactive or inactive in most cases. And those states are essentially saying, well, if you're not going to enforce any law, then we'll just repeal what we had written. So I wrote that article to essentially say, I don't think that's necessarily good for college athletics. I am not one to preach fatalism. I am obviously a huge proponent of student athletes getting paid, but I think there should be general guardrails to allow the free market to develop. And when I say that, I compared it to the Autobahn in Germany. You know, Autobahn does not have a speed limit, but there is a median so that cars don't just go crashing into each other at 150 miles per hour. What I mean is there should be rules that say schools can't just pay kids to come to school. There should be rules that say schools can't actually put together deals for their student athletes, because that really tilts the levers of equity in ways that we haven't seen before. You know, those D3, D2 schools can't keep up from a budget standpoint. There are schools in the Power 5 that are drastically different when you look at bottom lines, and I just don't think that's healthy for college athletics, right? And then you look at, should student athletes be employees? I mean, there is so much to unpack there. If they were to become employees, I mean, I have my own thoughts about that. That will be the end of college athletics as we know it. There will be so many non-revenue sports that have to be canceled. Kids' scholarships might have to get taxed. You know, would they be? I mean, it is just, there's so much. I think college sports is heading in that direction, BA.
Yeah.
But we need to start with general guidelines and guardrails that are not restrictive, but that allow for people to play within the lines, just like how there are sidelines on a basketball court. That's what we need, just some general boundaries to which this free market can continue to evolve.
I think that's incredibly well said. Let me just be very honest about one thing. While I'm kind of excited about the idea that some players who deserve some money are getting a chance to get that, I do have a little bit of NIL skepticism. I have to admit that. And I guess one of the things I'm a little skeptical of is why it is that some of the big brands that are out there haven't really weighed in on this too much yet. Like, you know, in terms of, we're coming up on a year of, you know, name, image, likeness stuff in the world of college sports here. But to my mind, and maybe you'll tell me that you can cite examples where it's different, but it doesn't really seem like the really big brands have weighed in a really big way as of yet. I mean, you have Dr. Pepper a little bit and things like that, but maybe it's been a little smaller than some people thought it would be a year into it. What can you tell me more about that as somebody who works at this on the inside?
Yeah, I think personally, in our opinion at Icon Source, is that the big brands have yet to dive into NIL because the industry is so fragmented, right? Different rules at different universities, student athletes all over the place, different guidelines within different conferences. You know, how are they going to aggregate the amount of student athletes that they want to make a real impact? If you're talking about Coca-Cola or Dr. Pepper or Delta, if we're going to focus in on Atlanta-based companies, they're going to want to go out and get a lot of student athletes and send them opportunities and have a real efficient process. Sliding into DMs on Instagram, not getting responses from student athletes, juggling different rules at school to school. Delta's not going to do that. They're going to go, this is ridiculous. This is wasting way too much time. You know, we have other things to do. So what we're doing at Icon Source is we're aggregating all of those student athletes into one platform, just like we're doing with the Classic City Collective, to where if Delta wanted to access Georgia student athletes, they would click into that marketplace. They can click a few buttons and send out 50 offers in 5 minutes. That's the type of efficiency that the big brands need and that they don't have because there are so many stakeholders, and I call them gatekeepers in this NIL industry, that just want to get their hands on things. Mm-hmm. They want to negotiate deals before they even bring it to the student athlete. You got agents out there who are telling a brand, no, 10 grand's not enough. I need 50 grand. And the brand's laughing at it going, okay, we're on to the next one. Forget about this. Yeah. So we need to create that atmosphere and that environment where big brands feel comfortable to know, hey, our marketing director can click into this platform and send out opportunities and get a deal done because they need to prove ROI for their bosses. And student athletes are the best way to do that, I think, as influencers within their respective markets.
I want to be respectful of your time. I could talk about this all day long. Let me try to squeeze in two quick things before we let you go. You mentioned a moment ago that you have some questions about the idea of some of these huge numbers that have been thrown around in terms of what, you know, boosters connected to some schools have been doing. How about some of the valuations that we're seeing? Like if you go to like certain websites, they'll tell you that Bryce Young, for instance, has an NIL valuation of $1.6 million. Do you think that's a fair valuation of what he can make in the current market?
You know, I find it fascinating. I wish my valuation was $1.6 million, and I would wonder if Bryce Young's representation agrees with that valuation, and I wonder if his representation likes that valuation being out there, because then he has to negotiate against that. So those are types of things where I say, hey, the more information, the better. I wonder if the student athletes like it or don't like it because they might agree or disagree with it. But the numbers are astronomical. The effect that you can get and the positive ROI you can attain through leveraging some of these student athletes, social media is amazing. And we really believe at Icon Source that student athletes are different than influencers, right? If you look at Stetson Bennett and he posts something, you know Stetson Bennett's busy from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. He must really like this business. He must really like this product. I'll go take a look at it. He's speaking to people in the state of Georgia, University of Georgia fans, other football players. It's not just some influencer on TikTok who's shoving promo codes down your throat. This is different. You can get real access and engagement with the market that you're trying to appeal to. So that's all really fascinating. I find it interesting for sure.
And last thing for you, and you mentioned a moment ago, the whole can of worms about potentially becoming employees, things like that. Putting that aside for a moment, because I do think that's a big topic on the horizon, but putting that aside for a moment, if I'm a player at Georgia, you mentioned Stetson Bennett, let's use him as a for instance on this, and we're thinking about the version of that guy 5 years from now as this becomes a more fully formed idea. Am I more likely to get paid by a big brand who's using me as an endorser, or am I more likely to get paid by a big booster who's maybe now making just call it a donation, I guess. I don't know what the right word is, but basically giving money to a collective that eventually comes my way? Who's more likely to be a good source of income for me, the very rich booster or the very big company?
You know, I think 5 years from now, sports marketing will still remain the number one way in which student athletes can monetize their name, image, and likeness. That's meaning endorsement deals. Obviously, these collectives at top-tier universities, much like the Classic City Collective, are going to have no problem drumming up interest from boosters, fans, and supporters to generate that pool of money in which then they can allocate to student athletes as they see fit. So I would say that those, endemic endorsement deals and creating those relationships. If I was a brand, you know who I wouldn't be going after? The senior who's got 5 more months on campus.
Yeah.
I would be going after the freshman and the sophomore, developing that relationship and knowing that I can have 2 to 3 years with that person speaking positively on behalf of my brand in that area over a much longer period of time. So there's still a big education process for the brand to just really understand the value that they can get leveraging and working with the student athlete. And I always tell student athletes, the relationships you can build by just having conversations with these business owners, with these people who want to support you and your universities, that's something that I was very, very grateful for while at Georgia. And a big reason I moved back to the state of Georgia from Scottsdale, Arizona, which my wife and I absolutely love. We love Georgia. And there's a reason we're back here, and we love the University of Georgia as well.
Yeah, Drew, a lot of these folks know you get a golfer out of Scottsdale, you've really done something. So to say goodbye to all those courses, it had to have been a good opportunity for you. I certainly understand that. And as we say goodbye to you, I'll let you know that, and I mean this in all sincerity, that as college sports changes, we got to have people who love college sports kind of at the forefront of helping make some of these decisions or guiding athletes as they make the decisions. So I'm glad to have you on that wall because I know how much you love the sport or just the idea of college sports in general. We got to have guys who love it, who are doing this kind of thing, and I am glad to know that you're one of the people that's involved in all this because I know how much you care about the sport thriving for a long time to come. So thanks for the work that you're doing. Thanks for helping us be aware of more of that, and I know we'll look forward to speaking to you in the very near future as a lot of this kind of stuff evolves there.
Absolutely, BA. Really appreciate the time and always here for you if you have any more questions.
Sounds good. That's great stuff there from Drew Butler. Obviously a terrific former Dawg. And I said before, he's clearly a sharp guy. But what's more important than that is when it comes to like people who are in the boardroom when these kinds of things are happening, it can't be just somebody who likes the dollar. Listen, I like the dollar. I want as many of them as I can get. But if all you've got are people who want the dollar, then eventually you're going to have a bunch of dollars but no college sports. And that's not a very good trade-off. And I think that guys like Drew Butler understand that. And if you go, like the column that he wrote was at LinkedIn. If you go to Drew's Twitter feed, you can see the link to the column. And this is, I think, a very even-handed perspective. Some of the things you heard Drew Butler say there are echoing some suspicions that I've had about, certain things. And, Drew obviously comes to this from the pro NIL perspective because he's helping athletes get NIL deals. But I think it's a very even-handed look at what's going on there. I think that's really good stuff from Drew Butler, and I am truly grateful that some of the people who are involved in some of these things are people who care about the college athletes, who are trying to make sense of this. And listen, if you're a college athlete, of course you want to cash in on something like that. But what are your realistic opportunities to be able to do that? What's real right now? What's some crazy rumor that Bro Bible has vomited out? Knowing the difference between one and the other, I think is a very important thing. And I'm glad to have sharp people helping athletes do that. And obviously Drew there at Icon is certainly an example of that. Let me also tell you about our friends at Finish Long Drink here. Great chance to settle in and enjoy this time of year. A lot of times when I think about Finish Long Drink, for whatever reason, I think about being outside and just kicking back and relaxing. And I think Finish Long Drink goes really well with that. I'm not kicking back and relaxing today. It's miserable weather. But guess what? Finish Long Drink tastes really good indoors too. Curl up by the fire, something like that. Enjoy one of the 4 different varieties that Finish Long Drink has for you online, thelongdrink.com. You can go there. You can learn about Long Drink Cranberry, which is a red can, the Long Drink Traditional. It has kind of a citrus flavor, and it's the blue can. Got the gin kick to it. Long Drink Zero, no carbs, no sugar. Long Drink Strong, 8.5% alcohol by volume. Or you can get the 8-can variety pack, which is 2 different cans of each of the 4 different long drink varieties. This comes from Helsinki, 1950s. That's when the Summer Games were there. That's one of the Finnish. That's why it's called the Finnish Long Drink. And it's a cool story. You can read more about that. Some of the celebrities who are kind of a part of all of this with them. And you can also find out how you can enjoy some yourself. Put in your zip code. It'll tell you where you can get some. Folks back on golf courses again. Finish Long Drink, a big part of the golf scene here in the Atlanta area. Bars, beverage stores, all that kind of stuff. Check them out online, thelongdrink.com. So I really enjoyed Drew Butler today. I thought that was very, very good. And I'm sure we'll have plenty to say about what Drew had to say as the days roll on here. But for now, let's say goodbye to you in style with our golden shoe, our Gator haters who always bring this up. And by the way, speaking of the long drink, how about our buddy Thad Stokes checking in to say found these gems to bring home to a dog household in Panama City Beach, Florida. Obviously, prayers out to the folks in Bay County right now because I know they're also dealing with some wildfires down there too. But look at that Georgia hat. Let's go back to that one for a second. Look at that Georgia hat. Very nice and sharp. And how about the long drink traditional and the long drink cranberry? Good stuff there. From my buddy Thad Stokes. So thank you for supporting the Finish Long Drink and Golden Shoe coming your way. Also we have all kinds of very important people in our audience. How about our buddy Kirby's Bowl Cut check in on Twitter to say the national championship trophy stopped by his office. I'm assuming this is the real deal here. It certainly looks to be that way. Maybe it's not, but it looks to be the real deal. How about that? Very cool to see. I was once in the same room with that trophy there as well, and that was a very fun thing for me. And I'm glad to know that one of our listeners had that there as well. Golden shoe coming your way there as well for the golden trophy that will be forever etched in all of our minds. I tell you who does not have a trophy to take a picture with. That is those lousy, stinking Gators, because it's been 4,808 days since Florida has won a national championship. Tough to be a Gator these days, and going to be tough to be a Gator again 234 days from right now. That is our Gator Hater Countdown. We will see all of you back here tomorrow for DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. And on video, R.S. Andrews Cool Down Time. Of course, R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. That is what R.S. Andrews can do for you. Really good stuff from all of them. And we did take a few comments off the top of the program here today, so we may not go super long on this right now. If for no other reason, then I always kind of felt like that the change over the offseason will probably shorten the shows a little bit. It doesn't seem like that's worked out so well. It seems like we're still blazing past an hour on a regular basis, but hopefully that's not going to get too many complaints. Let me go to YouTube first, and then we'll bounce around everything else after that. Let's see what else. Zebulon Owen says if the Dogs would have gone 10-3 this year, people would be calling for Kirby's job. Delusional Dog fans anyway. So I don't think this is unique to Georgia. I really don't. I think that this is the thing that I think a lot of times people just kind of misunderstand about college football, but specifically the SEC. Let Nick Saban go 10-2 this year and see what happens. Now, I don't think they will, but what if Bryce Young were to, I don't know, whatever. Let's say that Nick Saban goes 10-2. What do you think the offseason conversation is going to be like for Alabama fans? They're not going to give Saban credit for those national championships. It becomes kind of a what have you done for me now type of thing. And Georgia fans really aren't all that different on that themselves either. You're right. Had Georgia had a – now, I think that – look, if Georgia had lost 3 times, I think Georgia would have been worthy of criticism. I mean, to be honest with you, now I'm not going to be calling for Kirby's job, but that would not have been a good thing, especially on the heels of Georgia the year prior to that not being in the SEC championship, and the year before like there was a little bit of a regression year over year that Georgia was dealing with. And so to lose 3 games this past season would have been really, really bad for UGA. And some of the criticism that would have come Kirby Smart's way would have been warranted on that. I do believe that. However, it didn't occur that Georgia won the national championship. But the point I'm trying to make, though, is that every coach is like, one great season away from being, revered, and one bad season away from being on the hot seat. That's what I always find interesting about the hot seat conversation. Hey, which coach is on the hot seat? Every coach is always 1 year away from being on the hot seat. They just are. That if you have a bad season now, next year you have to win, or otherwise it's going to be really, really tough for you. And there is very little winning you can do in the past to insulate yourself from whatever might be happening in the present. That's just kind of how that is. Courtney Michelle checks in to say, it's been a minute. Haven't had time to be on here since won the national championship. Good seeing you guys again. Courtney, good seeing you there as well, and I'm glad you're checking in here today. Thanks so much. Beer Cans and Batty says, we weren't going to lose to Bama twice. I called it correctly the first time. Game was a fluke. So there you go. Tennille Cavino also saying, especially in the SEC, for what I was saying a moment ago, and that's true. I'm always amazed at how patient some other programs are. Like, think about a program like, say, Nebraska, which was, if you want to go back to the 90s, Nebraska was one of the best programs in all of college football. And they've been pretty mediocre for a long time now, and their fans are just kind of cool with it. That's amazing to me. It's amazing how patient some programs outside the SEC are with their program. Whereas, like, as I said before, in the SEC, you are one bad season away from the apocalypse. It is apocalyptic. And if you follow like message boards and comment sections and social media during a game, this stuff isn't just evaluated from game to game. It's evaluated quarter to quarter, play to play. Fates have a way of rising and falling. So it is just different. When you get outside the footprint of all this, it is just different. In fact, I'm getting to the point, and some of the stuff that Drew said a moment ago kind of brings this out in me more. I'm starting to get to the point where I'm starting to wonder, is the SEC just too different to, like, at a certain point in time, are we going to give up the charade that the entire country's playing the same sport? I'm starting to be of the growing belief that eventually this sport is going to be splintered, and it may have to be splintered to save it. I'm currently workshopping that take. The SEC is just too different in ways that are both sensible and nonsensical, but it just may be too different to go in lockstep with the rest of these conferences forever, for sure. Let's see what else. William Carter says, how long before Mims is a starter? I think it needs to be this year. Now, it's probably not going to be a tackle, but do you take Amarius Mims at guard? I probably would. I think this is truly a 5-best situation, and I think one of the reasons why Stacey Searles is here is to make sure that Amarius Mims becomes one of Georgia's 5 best offensive linemen if he's not already. Tino Calvino says, Oklahoma fans, given the way they've kind of turned on their own people back and forth game to game, maybe they are showing they're truly SEC ready, and Tennille may be right about that. That's really funny. Johnny Dog also points out something kind of interesting, is that Georgia's got Clemson locked in for a lot of games through 2031, and Clemson not quite playoff level this year. Who knows what the future looks like, but when those games were signed, that was as big a non-conference opponent as you could have, and depending on how the future looks, maybe all of a sudden these have become a little bit more, I don't want to say guaranteed wins, but more manageable wins for UGA than maybe it looked like when those series were first signed. There's some interesting stuff out there about DJ Uyunglele right now, about the fact that he's apparently lost a good bit of weight. DJ's odds to win the Heisman are actually still fairly good. He's actually one of the top guys to win the 2022 Heisman, according to some of the gambling folks. I think Clemson's going to be huge changeover with the coaching staff. As Johnny said a moment ago, the thought there may be some regression. I think Clemson's going to be one of the real interesting teams to watch this upcoming season to see if they still are a title contender. Paul Moon says he's rooting for DJ to turn it around. Seems like a good dude. Yeah, I certainly don't have anything against him myself. Let's see what else. Doghouse Lawn Care says, I respect Dabo as well. However, I do think the tables have turned over there. I don't see them anywhere near the playoff anytime soon. The actual truth is I do respect Dabo Swinney. And I probably respect Dabo more than some of y'all wish that I would, to be honest with you. There are certain takes that, I'm not saying that I would ever lie, because I never would, but there are certain takes that I keep to myself just to keep the peace around here a little bit. And I'm a little bit more pro Dabo. Now I would never cheer for Clemson because I'm a Georgia guy and that's not what we do. But in terms of having respect for a guy, I do kind of respect Dabo Swinney a little bit. And so, when there's a pile-on of him by, certain media types, for the most part, I try to stay out of that. But it's going to be interesting for him because he has tried to draw a line in the sand that's becoming harder to draw. And, it's one thing to be really selective in your recruitment as long as you've got a all-time great quarterback to cover up your warts. But when that guy's not there, all of a sudden it does point out, and I know we have a good friend of ours, Jordan Bowman, that's in our comment section a lot, who's a Clemson guy, and maybe he would agree with this, maybe he wouldn't, but when you don't have Deshaun, when you don't have Trevor Lawrence, all of a sudden the other things you don't have in your program become a lot more easy to spot, and that's probably what Clemson's kind of dealing with right now. Zebulon Owen says SEC. I like that. Tiger Baskin says, I'm pro Brian Adams. I don't know if that was meant to be for me, Brandon Adams, or the true, I guess we call it Canadian boss, Brian Adams, or I guess Crush, former WWE wrestler, was also Brian Adams there as well. Let me go to Facebook here for a moment. Philip Jordan Wells disappointed in the content on the Facebook comment section today. Rick Martin says somebody needs to tell Texas A&M they've taken the first step towards ruining college football. It is important to note that a guy who works in the NIL world for a living just said a moment ago that he's not quite so sure that some of that Texas A&M stuff is true. I told you about that at the time, that it just didn't ring true for me, and you hear Drew Butler asking his own pointed questions about that there as well. So just file that away. And I think a lot of you wonder, what is my axe to grind in all this? And it's a very fair question to ask. Like why do I make such a point of pointing out all of the erroneous reporting when it comes to name, image, and likeness? For me, there's a reason for this, and Drew touched on this. Drew talked about the fact that we could have a future on the horizon where, you're turning athletes into employees. And I think that'd be terrible, not just for the sport, but for the athletes who play the sport. And here's my concern, is that I think that there is, on the part of some, an intentional attempt to exaggerate the impact of name, image, and likeness as a way of ushering in more radical change for the sport. In other words, I think there's an attempt to say the NIL stuff is bigger than it is so that one day they can say, hey, the sport's already so crazy, why not make it a little crazier? And I'm trying to head that off at the pass. I am trying to play defense against that before it happens, because eventually I do believe that's what's going to happen. So that's why I asked Drew Butler, do you really think that Bryce Young has an NIL valuation of $1.6 million? And that's why it matters to me do you really think that Texas A&M is paying $30 million for recruits through some, probably unofficial NIL collective? And when the answer to those questions is not an obvious yes, I think it's important to note that college football still hasn't changed as much yet as some people seem to want to push that it has. Now, eventually, does it change more? Who knows? But I just think it's important to know that it ain't the Wild West yet. It's just not. And for those of us who would like to keep it from becoming the Wild West, because we want to protect the sport that's not just been entertainment for us, but serve the players who've played it, keeping track of just how normal it all still is for most players, I think, is an important part of that. Let's see what else. Let's see what else. Let's get some other comments. How about this? Let's read this. Kapaga says, made it from Afghanistan. My gosh, he says, right arm was amputated and now trying to save the right leg. Gosh, Kapaga, our prayers will certainly be with you for sure. So continued prayers for you in a big way on that. Thanks for stopping by and sharing some time with us here today. I truly appreciate that. And, have folks from the armed services who join our show is the kind of thing that I will never take for granted. I am certainly, very prayerful. Oh, not him. It's his nephew. Apologize. But nonetheless, the prayers certainly don't subside because of that. Listen, we take it really seriously around here that a lot of folks who've been stationed other places or folks who have family members stationed other places, the fact that y'all check in on our show has always been a very big deal to me because that's the kind of thing I do take very seriously. Dan Carl says, I remember back in August you said if Georgia was going to be on top of the college football world, they need to have 3 or 4 first-round picks. Yeah, I mean, we really even said more than that, and as it turns out, Georgia's going to get pretty close to that mark. And, Dan, first of all, thanks for remembering that we did talk a lot about that. Spent a lot of the offseason talking about that. In fact, at times I got some complaints we're talking too much about it. But I think the season that Georgia just had validates just how true that is. And I mentioned this when I was on the radio this morning. I make a weekly appearance on 960 The Ref on their morning show in Athens. And one of the things I said is that we shouldn't take for granted that there's such a close connection between individual success, guys moving on to the NFL, and team success that it wouldn't necessarily have to be that way. For instance, there are other sports where it's not necessarily that way. I don't know there's a huge correlation between NBA draft prospects and college basketball tournament success. In fact, we're getting ready to watch the NCAA tournament coming up, and for the most part, the guys that score the most points, that contribute the most to winning, will all be the upperclassmen type guys, not the one-and-done freshman phenoms who are destined to be first-round picks. In fact, look at a school like Kentucky, which has hoarded NBA talent on its roster, but that has not really worked out to the tune of tournament success for Kentucky in quite some time. That for whatever reason, and it could just be randomness, but for whatever reason, in college basketball right now, there does not seem to be a great correlation between elite NBA draft prospects and success at the Final Four or national championship level. College football is different than that. You don't have to make a choice. You can challenge players to get better individually in knowing that if you've got enough of those guys who, as Dan points out, who become elite NFL draft prospects, your team will reap the benefits of that. Georgia's going to be the latest example come April, reigning national champion who dominates on draft night. Alabama was that version for the 2021 draft on the heels of having won the 2020 national championship. LSU was that year before that. Clemson was that the year before that. These teams that win national championships dominate the following NFL draft, and Georgia's going to do that again, it seems like. So, yeah, Dan, I think you're absolutely right about all that. Mike Zambiasi says, hey, y'all, from Bama country, life is good here except the gas prices. Much love to all my DawgNation friends. Yeah, gas prices right now, they're just a nightmare. And, you start thinking about, folks want to travel during the summer. You start thinking about all the travel we're doing during the fall, going to high school games and, wherever the dogs are playing. And I don't know, man. Somebody's got to do something because that's going to be tough. Family vacations in the summer are important. And, going to see football games is, for some of us a livelihood. For others, it's a great pastime. And we got to do something about these gas prices. But, Mike, I'm glad you're enjoying yourself. I'm sure it feels pretty good to be a national champion in Bama country right now. I'm sure that it is. Matt Rukavina, very funny stuff from Matt here. Let's see what else. Hugh Nash says, I would like constraints put on name, image, likeness where players aren't eligible after their freshman year. That way kids aren't getting preyed on in high school and solely going to the highest bidder. Also, by then, their NIL should be more valuable because they've had a chance to do something at the college level. Yeah, here's the other thing that you got to kind of point out here. Like, part of the reason why, even if you can induce recruits with NIL payments, most big brands are just simply not going to do that. And the reason why they're not going to is because young athletes are a risky bet. And that's not me making some sort of blanket statement. For those of you that have young teenage sons, their auto insurance is more expensive. It's like, this is not just like some blowhard in front of a microphone. These are actuarial tables. Like, it's harder to get auto insurance for a teenage boy than it is for a teenage girl. That's just kind of the way that life goes. And, you think about this like the football card market. like I care about this kind of stuff. Like if I could give you a Gem Mint 10 rookie card, you want Tom Brady, you want Patrick Mahomes. The older player, the player who's on the other side of his career, is just a safer bet. And a lot of marketing companies kind of view things the same way. Now, not that, Mahomes is going to have some sort of personal failing, but when you're this young into your career, your market's just a little bit more volatile. It could go way up, but it could also go way down. And for a lot of these recruits, about half of them just don't succeed. And you can't do anything about that. And you can't really identify on the front end which recruits are going to succeed and which ones are not. And so even if you do open up the door for more payment of recruits, basically, going against what the commenter argued for, even if you did have that, I just don't believe that most big brands are going to want to participate in that, because it's hard to know if the money you're spending to market or to allow that recruit to market for you is going to end up being worth it, because who knows what happens to a lot of these guys once they get on campus. And that's just one of the realities of NIL. Keith Fold says, I spent 4 years in Athens, graduated in 1973, and have been a season ticket holder ever since. I've seen the good times and the lean years, and through it all, I still love my dogs. Yeah, if you've been doing it, since the early 70s, you have seen a lot of cool stuff. And like you said, you've seen some ups and some downs and everything in between. I would imagine that perspective makes enjoying a national championship all the much better, I'm imagining. Daniel Aldridge says everything's going to be expensive. Just having to eat's going to be tough. Yeah. I mean, like, I'm a little bit of a carnivore. Like, I pretty much eat the same thing for every meal, at least during the week. Like on the weekend, I'll splurge a little bit. But in the week, during the week, I basically eat like a chicken breast for lunch and a steak for dinner. And I pretty much do that every single meal. Like my wife, I think, probably likes it for the most part, because you don't have to think about what to cook. I eat the same thing. I'm going to go home and eat a chicken breast for lunch, and for dinner, I'll have a steak. But the problem is, like, that sort of meat stuff is what's gotten crazy expensive these days. The steak, the chicken, things like that, especially like, the chicken breast, like, big white meat chicken. Yeah, it's gotten expensive. There's no question about that. There's no question about that. Rick Martin says there's no way Texas A&M could have had the recruiting year they had without offering money. I think there's a big chasm, though, between offering money and offering $30 million. And that's the issue here, is that I think a lot of players around the world of college football are hearing these terms thrown around of, did you hear about what so-and-so got at so-and-so school? And I think it makes them dissatisfied with their current situation. It makes them more tempted to want to enter the transfer portal. But when you actually dig deep, there's no one on the record that's willing to confirm these big, huge prices, these big, huge payments. There's no one willing to speak about that on the record. And the lack of evidence would lead me to believe that the money that's being thrown around, even by Texas A&M, are just a lot smaller dollar figure than has been commonly reported or suggested to be. I just think the overall dollar numbers are likely much, much smaller. Not saying it's zero, but not the huge, not the huge dollar figures. In fact, my assumption is, I don't mind telling you this, and don't mind telling you there's a chance that I'm wrong, but nonetheless, I simply do not believe there is a recruit in the 2022 class who is looking at a six-figure payment for having signed at so-and-so school. First of all, that's technically against state law, but even if the law right now is not going to be enforced, I don't think anyone got six figures for signing at any school this year. I just don't. Now, do they have the promise of six figures on down the line? And, like some of this ends up being, non-cash type payments, cash value type things, but in terms of actual money in the pocket, I don't believe a single recruit in the 2022 class got six figures or more because of the school that he signed with. I just don't think I don't think that happened. Keith Fold says, I also need some vegetables. So I'll eat just enough broccoli just to say that I did. And for whatever reason, they're only about two vegetables I like, broccoli and asparagus. And so I'll kind of touch my lips to a little bit of broccoli just so I can say that I did. Other than that, I'm basically Daniel Aldridge also brings up a good point about chicken wings. Chicken wings have got so expensive. And I do love wings. I saw where one of the companies is now doing thighs. Like, if you want to know how expensive chicken wings have gotten, folks are doing thighs now. That's how expensive they've gotten. Let me go to DawgNation.com for a minute. We'll get ready to wrap up. Big Natty Dog on the subject of Drew Butler. Yeah, Drew's a sharp guy. There's no question about that. Very, very sharp guy. You always knew that Drew was going to be doing something kind of cool. And I meant what I said. I think it's good to have somebody who, cares about college sports and also, kind of a sharp dude kind of in all of this. So I know that's the case. Let's see what else. Brad Houghton on the subject of Terrence Edwards. Yeah, we're going to ask Terrence about Arik on Thursday, and we'll find out what he says. Yeah, we'll definitely find out what he says for sure. Let's see what else. Richard Dees asks, have you ever heard a good reason for why college continues to limit pass interference to 15 yards versus the spot for the penalty? Big Natty Dog weighs in to say, my guess is it's for parity. A school like Bama last year could run streaks every play and win by 100. The 15-yard penalty keeps the game manageable. I think Big Natty brings up a good point on that. I also think the rule kind of predates the time in which teams were throwing as much as they are now. And so, when you think about this rule being put into place, a 15-yard pass play was a pretty big pass play for back then. And now teams are throwing much deeper than that with regularity. Here's the thing, Richard. If I'm just going to be completely candid here, obviously the NFL version of the pass interference penalty would be the more fair way to do this. Right now, you're incentivized to pass interfere if you're worried about getting beat. So on the one hand, evolving the rule to make it resemble the NFL would be better. But on the other hand, these refs can't call that. Like, do you want to give more power? And I'm not criticizing you. I'm just kind of arguing my own point of view on this. I don't want to give more power to these college officials. They're terrible. And listen, it's a hard job. I don't know what to do. But, these guys have a hard time controlling the game as it is. And as it stands right now, the biggest penalty they can impose is 15 yards. I do not want to give some of these doofuses the power to throw a 50-yard penalty. I just don't want to do it. And it would be more fair to have the NFL rule, and the NFL officials aren't perfect themselves. I just don't trust the officials to give them even more leeway in terms of how a game is called. I just don't. It's kind of one of the same reasons why the other rule that you commonly hear folks want to change is the thing where you're not down by contact. In the NFL, if you fall down but it's not down by contact, you can get right back up. And a lot of folks seem to want to change that. To me, it's always made sense that if you're down for whatever reason you're down by. But once again, it's like the last thing I need is another judgment call for these, dingbats trying to figure out. I don't want more power in the hands of the officials. Doghouse Lawn Care says YouTube's getting political. Yeah, YouTube has a tendency to want to do that. I think there's some people who like to see if they can get the conversation, in the political direction for whatever reason. Devil Dog says, statues, who gets one? Who doesn't? I would prefer the New York Yankees Monument Park approach. Much easier to make room for bronze plaques on sacred ground at Stanford or at Sanford Stadium or lining the bridge. Rename it Memorial Bridge. Yeah, the bridge is a perfect example of that. Now, the bridge is also a working road when football games are not taking place, and maybe that's part of the issue there with that. But there are a couple of things here for me on the statue thing. And like I said, maybe we'll do this in the regular show at some point in time. I have never seen a statue that I did not think deserved a right to exist. And you mentioned like the Monument Park thing for the Yankees where it's like a plaque instead of that. I've been to like the new Comiskey Park, which is not quite so new anymore in Chicago. Like you go out there and like their outfield, it's a great collection of statues of guys who played for the program, played in the organization, Carlton Fisk and Harold Baines and guys like that. And it's just kind of cool to see. Like people say, the common argument against the Herschel Walker statue, which I'm starting to suspect I know why he doesn't have one, but the common argument, against the Herschel Walker statue is, well, if you give one to him, who else do you give one to? You got to give one to Frank Sewich, you got to give one to Charlie Drippy. My response is good. Give one to all those guys. Like I have a pretty high tolerance for statues. Like I'd take one for the Heisman guys. Trippy's got his jersey retired. He was the number one overall pick on the 46 team. I'd probably give him one. I'd probably give David Pollock one. You'd have to give out a lot of statues before I'd run out of tolerance for statues. And it's like, okay, now Kirby Smart's won a national championship. So here's where it gets tricky. So you haven't done anything to honor your past. And I realize this is more complicated than I'm making it be. I do get that. But you haven't done anything to acknowledge your past. Eventually, Kirby Smart's going to get something like this. Statue or whatever else. Well, all of a sudden now, are we going to say, now maybe Kirby goes on to win 5 national championships and Obviously, that's an entirely different category than anybody's ever been in when it comes to Georgia football. But let's just freeze time where it is right now. I mean, if I said to you, separate from this, hey, would you like to see Kirby Smart get a statue? He won a national championship. Most people would probably say yes. And I would agree with you. So if you give Kirby Smart a statue, but you haven't given a statue to these other players and figures in your program, or Vince Dooley's got a statue, but it's halfway to Watkinsville, are you saying that the current era of Georgia football is more important than the previous Georgia era? Now, I don't know why you would say that. And as I said before, I totally understand this is more complicated than I'm making it out to be. But I don't know. Georgia's lack of celebration for its history, after a while, just starts to get a little weird. And I think we're kind of getting that era. On an entirely different note, the other thing I was thinking about in regards to the Baker Mayfield statue is, this would be kind of an interesting thing to keep up with. How many wins does Georgia have versus statues? Now, I don't just mean like quarterbacks that can't move in the pocket. But how many wins does Georgia have versus statue guys? Like beating Nick Saban in the national championship, that's a statue win. Nick Saban's got a statue at Alabama. Tim Tebow's got a statue at Florida. Georgia beat him in 2007. Baker Mayfield about to get a statue at Oklahoma. His big season culminated in a loss to UGA. That's a big-time statue win right there. So that's 3 statue wins that Georgia has. How many other statue wins? Some of y'all who are a little older, help me out with that. Anybody else that you can think of that's got a statue that Georgia has a win against? I'd be curious to know. Big Natty Dog, nice prediction here about Maryland coming up. Chance to field a defense, have a good chance. Maryland's in the Big Ten now, but a little talk up for Mike Locksley's team there. Let's see what else. Let me go back over to YouTube for a second and see if they're doing anything. Saker Gove says, Baker got a statue? Like, why? For a Heisman? But that is like the standard that some programs have. Auburn's giving all of its Heisman Trophy winners, what does it have, 2? Pat Sullivan and Cam Newton. They've both got statues for that, I believe. Florida's Heisman guys, Tebow, Spurrier. Is that it for them? Am I leaving somebody out? I feel like Werfel. Did Werfel win the Heisman? I think Werfel won the Heisman. They've got statues. So that's like the standard that some programs have. Like Bama gives a statue to its national championship coaches. So obviously Bear Bryant's got one, Nick Saban's got one, but like if you go outside the stadium, like Wallace Wade, get this big statue. Wallace Wade's the guy that the stadium's named for at Duke. Not quite in keeping with Nick Saban, Bear Bryant, but all the coaches that won national championships at Alabama have statues. Like different programs can have their own specifically defined criteria for all that. Let's see what else. Jonathan Aaron says, I think Reed Gilbert will do amazing things this upcoming season. Probably going to have to give 2 or 3 players on Brock Bowers at all times. Yeah, I mean, it's fun to think about. It is fun to think about that for sure. Zebulon Owen says, I lived in Charlotte for 2 years for tech school. Never went to the Triangle area, but I'm a hot rod guy, so we went to Hickory for the street race. That's actually really cool. There's some great racing towns in North Carolina. Some of those defunct NASCAR tracks in the state of North Carolina are just a kind of a cool thing to think about. I mean, it's kind of sad to think about how things have changed, but just kind of cool to think about the spots where like NASCAR used to go, the Cup Series used to go, or what it would have been called then, for sure. Courtney Michelle says, Kirby's my favorite coach. The more statues, the better. I agree with all of that. Speaking of, Rockingham, another one of those great racing towns in North Carolina for sure. Let's see what else. Zebulon Owen says I say asparagus weird. Do I say it weird? I probably say a lot of things weird. All right, we're going to get ready to go. Good stuff all the way around. Is there anything else we need to do before we go? Let me check in the other comment sections very quickly here to see if anybody else got a final thought before we kind of wrap things up. Dan Aldrich says Daytona's got an awesome Dale Earnhardt statue. I'd love to see that. I've been to the Daytona track before, but I've never been to the race there. I think I'm going to the Atlanta race this weekend, though. Excited about that. Hopefully the weather turns out. Rick Martin says Irk Russell needs a statue. 1,000,000%. Does Irk have a statue in Statesboro? I'd be curious to know that. Can you imagine how cool an Irk Russell statue would be, like the bloody forehead? I mean, I don't know if they even let us do that in 2022, even on a statue. But can you imagine how cool that'd be to have the blood gushing on the forehead of the Irk Russell statue? I'd love to see that. Irk also, sort of began his coaching career there, at Grady High School, Grady Stadium. Of course, it's called Midtown High School now. But it'd be kind of cool to have a statue of him outside that. That'd be really fun. Gerald Harmon says, when's that championship trophy going to make its way towards Cobb County? I don't know. We'll try to give you an update on that, Gerald, when it does. By the way, coolest statue I may have ever seen. When we were in Pasadena for the Rose Bowl, Jackie Robinson went to UCLA. So there's a statue outside the Rose Bowl of Jackie Robinson playing football, like running the football. Can you imagine how cool that is? If you go back and search my timeline from the time I tweeted a picture of this, how cool is that statue? The great, obviously, not just great former baseball player, but historic figure in the world of sports, famous for being a part of the Dodgers organization, but running with the football at UCLA, statue of him outside the Rose Bowl. That's a very, very cool statue. Very cool statue. Matthew asked about Larry Munson having a statue. What Munson has, and I do think this is really well done. This is an example of Georgia, I think, doing a good job of celebrating history there. The broadcast booth in the press box is very well set up to honor Larry Munson. There's a nice plaque. Somebody mentioned the Monument Park style plaques that the Yankees have. There's a very nice plaque, very similar to that, outside the broadcast booth. When you walk in, it says Larry Munson broadcast booth, and there's a nice mural of Munson behind you there. So that history is very well honored. In fact, I've done some radio shows, things like that, from in that room in the past. Talk about a great vibe. That's a great vibe. I think the Larry Munson broadcast booth is very well done. It'll be interesting to see when the press box moves, and at UGA eventually it's going to, broadcast booths, I'm guessing, in some form or fashion, are likely to move too, how that is impacted by all that. But the Larry Munson broadcast booth is really, really well done. So the average fan doesn't get to see that very much, but it is there. Now, all the UGAs, they got statues and plaques galore. I mean, and I'm not against that. But can we do something for some human beings too? That would be my one wish on some of that kind of stuff. So there is an Irk Russell. Somebody put this in the comment section. There is an Irk Russell statue in Statesboro. I go by Statesboro every now and then. I may have to stop by there and see that. That's kind of cool. Matthew Goodwin says most fans don't get to see the Larry Munson thing. That is true. Most fans don't get to see that, but it's still there. But you're right. Having that out more in the regular corridor. However, this is a kind of a cool change that, and Josh Brooks was pretty instrumental in making this change, that if you go through the stadium now, there's a lot of, walls that have been painted to say Run Lindsay. And I know there's one that says Run Lindsay. There may be one that says look at the sugar falling out of the sky. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff that's, in the stadium now. I mean, Sanford Stadium looks a lot more like Georgia Stadium because of the way in which they've kind of repainted the walls or hung some, some nice, vinyl, whatever you want to call it, signage to cover up some what otherwise would be chain link fence. So the Munson history is somewhat honored with some of the stuff they have on the walls in there. But you're right. Had the Munson thing that's in the broadcast booth been more public, more people would have gotten to see it. No doubt about that. We'll finish with this. Keith Fold says, statues for Irk, Dooley, Kirby, Herschel, Sinkwich, Trippy, Munson. Probably would think of some others there as well. I'm fine with all those. I really am. I'm fine with absolutely fine with every one of those. And I'm also would be okay with kind of a Monument Park type thing where it doesn't have to be full-fledged statue. It can kind of be, one of those things like if you're only doing plaques, but you're doing nice plaques, almost like Hall of Fame bust type things, then you would have room to do more of those. So maybe there's a thought of that there in the future. All right, we got to go for now. We've been on the show for 6 hours. All right, thanks for being here. R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Y'all find R.S. Andrews online, rsandrews.com. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the prices promised. You can trust them to do all that for you. Also, Atlanta Journal-Constitution online, ajc.com. More updates on the Calvin Ridley situation. AJC's got you covered on that. Also, continuing lingering effects from the baseball lockout. That's going on there as well. You can read about that. And high school basketball state championships coming up here, too. That's good stuff. Atlanta United got a game this weekend, or a match, I guess you would call it. Pay attention to that. And a whole lot more. So we'll check that out online. Atlanta Journal-Constitution at ajc.com. You have a great, great day. Back here tomorrow, 9:45, 1st and 15, 10 a.m., DawgNation. All the other platforms for DawgNation Daily. We're presented by Breda Pest Management, and we'll look forward to talking to you then.